Hi, I'm Andrew Johnson. Sometimes people call me AJ. And today I would like to talk a bit about how I cope with grief. I've talked a lot on my YouTube channel about mental health. And in one of my recent videos, I talked about 20 years of living with anxiety and depression and shared quite a bit about my personal story, although that's certainly not all there is to my personal story. However, I walked away from that video thinking that there was definitely more that is to the story, and I thought, well, a really good way to get into adding on a little bit to that video would actually be to talk about something that I've been dealing with as well for the past 3 years. During this pandemic, I have dealt with a lot of grief and loss. And I thought that, I think a criticism of my channel often is sort of like viewers feel they're not really getting anything from it. Have I presented to you, something that's going to help you with your day? Or I think that my music can be very inspirational, perhaps gently motivating. It can give hope and promote healing in ways, but it's time for me to talk a little bit about the practical ways I practice well-being. And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm perfect at it. Of course not. I just figured out of a lot of things I've dealt with, I know for sure that grief is an area that I think a lot of folks can relate to right now. And that was one piece out of my last few YouTube videos that I thought was really missing. I did this two-part video on my album, Butterscotch and Sophistication, talking about the making of that and the 20 years living with anxiety, depression, and this kind of stuff. I thought there was a better way that I could make what I'm talking about a little more, perhaps, relatable to people, and just talk a little bit more about grief and talk a little bit more about some of the issues that I've dealt with and some of the things I've done, to either help myself or soothe myself, not necessarily fix the issues, but being able to support myself and to get through incredibly difficult circumstances. I can't remember which video it was. I know I had mentioned, a friend of mine in high school that took their life, and I didn't mention as well throughout in the mid-2010s, it was 2016, my grandmother died, and I know that was a difficult one for me as well, even though she was just shy of turning 103. It's still one of those things that, I think about her a lot. Just thankful that I had her in my life and in my youth and childhood growing up. And as well, there was another friend of mine that took his life in 2020. This was somebody that I hadn't talked to in quite a number of years, but we were very close. It's about 2009 up until about 2013, 2014. We had been in touch for quite a few years, and I heard of his passing, and and I guess all I want to say is that the loss of human life obviously is extremely difficult, whether it's, an elderly person, somebody close to your age or younger, it's very difficult to go through. And not only is it the sadness that's part of it, but there's also what a lot of folks don't talk about is anger, is the fear, so many emotions. And this is still me talking on a very pretty basic level of what grief is. It really does go deeper than that. And I think it's so important for me to highlight just right now as I'm talking that still today, when dealing with grief, often, well, grief or bereavement, a lot of folks just aren't given the time to grieve, or they don't feel they have the permission to feel what they're feeling and to know that that's okay. And this is something that, I've thought of for many, many years, and it's really nothing new. I'm just another voice to say that, well, absolutely, people aren't granted to just feel how they're feeling, and perhaps, things like taking time off of work, or, maybe not necessarily wanting to be part of a social activity, and that might be how that person's coping, and that's okay. It's very complicated, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like grief is simple, that there's some kind of linear progression to it, or I'm supposed to feel this and then I feel this. It's a very individual process, and that is also a very important word to mention when just bringing up the subject. Processing grief is often something I know it's like you're not allowed to do. And when you hear people, sharing the stories of people they lost in everyday public discourse, people want to sort of write it off and say, you're being too negative, or you're being repetitive. I've heard you talk about that before. But you know what? Sometimes just as a part of, well, it's a very human thing. It's a very natural thing when experiencing grief or, a traumatic situation, that of course you're going to repeat it. And you're working through your mind to make sense of something that sometimes doesn't even make sense. I've heard stories, not myself, but when you've heard of somebody that's passed away, that's very close to you, and there's some feeling inside like you want to call that person and talk to that person about the loss of that person, even though it doesn't make any sense. Sometimes those experiences are also part of the process. Recently, I have been reflecting upon grief and knowing that, well, I am in a better place with it in terms of me not focused only on the day that the person died, but thinking about the person's life and what they had meant to me. Like I say, my friend that passed away in high school, like it's still hard to talk about it, and it very much saddens me. Certainly as time has gone on, it can become a little bit easier to have those discussions and just enjoy the memory of my friend. And similarly, it's like that with my grandmother, where, I know rationally it's like, well, she was 103, turning 103. Like, of course, she wasn't going to be around forever. Certainly when losing a person that's so much part of your childhood, and somebody that really helped shape you and form you into the person that you are, My grandmother had just such this incredible sense of poise and dignity and a lot of wisdom and love for animals and children, and also just being very independent and wanting to do things her way. That, I just think of these things and just how special she was to me, and providing me a space where I felt very safe with her. And that feeling, I still try to, remember that and hold on to that warmth that I knew of her. So, when I'm looking at a picture of my grandma, it's not something, where I just burst out into tears, or, I'm extremely emotional about it or something. But, there's just a sense of that, back to that space of the warm and fuzzies of my childhood, and remembering that she provided me with a sense of safety and soothing and love. And that's very important to know that I have that, and to then be just simply grateful for having that experience. And not everybody has that. Um, and it makes me think, I am lucky that I do have a wonderful family. Certainly my my mother and my brothers, and I am very lucky to have such love that surrounds me, and I know that I'm surrounded by love. That kind of thought, which, it's an individual thing, what might work for me in terms of dealing with grief, it may not work the same for somebody else, and that's okay. I can only talk from my experience. Um, but I just want to start with the acknowledging grief is often thought of as close people in our lives, right? And I just wanted to start there and just talking a little bit loosely about how I've been able to cope with that. I think that certainly time, I don't think it heals all wounds. Um, it does allow for some insight and perspective there. And, I'd say the same about my friend that passed away in 2020. Um, it's still kind of fresh in ways, and I didn't even think it would have, I didn't think it would affect me as deeply, because like I say, I kind of fell out of touch with this person. I am coming back to that space of just really remembering the memory of my friend. Actually, the friendship was a very kind of odd relationship to begin with, as in, me and this guy were basically polar opposites. We're not, looking at the two of us, you wouldn't think we would be friends at all or hanging out. But I was just thinking the other day of just his sense of humor, his intelligence. He could make me laugh in ways I don't think anybody has to this day, in ways we could relate to each other. And we had spent quite a number of years, hanging out and having conversations through MSN Messenger back when that was a thing. I remember he used to send me nudges. That was a thing. You used to be able to send a nudge on MSN Messenger, and he would, sometimes he would do that and, kind of say these things to, just kind of get a rise out of me. But, it didn't bother me. It was friendly and just feeling like somebody's there for me in a sense, and, I was just very saddened to hear of his passing, and in the way that it happened. I grieved him twice, basically, in a sense, because, like I say, I just kind of had a falling out with him. We just didn't really talk as much anymore, and I did hear he had a very severe accident, so he wasn't, I don't know if it was the last year or 2 years of his life, he wasn't really the same person. So it was sort of like he was somebody that basically, yeah, you did grieve him more than one time. Again, though, I am coming back to that space of thinking more about the way he lived and celebrating his life, appreciating those memories that I had with him uh, as a friend of mine. And I'm aware that not only is it difficult, obviously, to grieve human beings, as well as it could be pets, it could be a job that you've lost. There's so many different things that people can grieve over, right? These were topics that I have brought up before. Um, Again, I just wanted to kind of touch up on it and I suppose update, uh, where I am in terms of the grieving of it and what are some of the things that have helped me. So, of course, grief is never really finished. There's never really closure. There's never really resolve of the situation. Sometimes maybe you can have a sense of justice or coming full circle or something to that effect. But it's always it becomes a part of you, and you kind of grow around your grief as life inevitably goes on. Yeah, another one of these areas that I had mentioned was a form of loss and grief for me was a housing situation I had that ties up with ex-roommates. Again, I'm not going to get into all of those details, but I did have quite a housing ordeal over the course of the pandemic that I feel was a bit of a unique experience living on my own that, not everybody went through that, in the middle of a pandemic and feeling like you don't really have a safe place to live or a place that you feel is a home to you. So definitely I was dealing with the grief of, which is why I have written songs relating to this as well. And that's part of my healing and coping is songwriting. I cannot tell you how emotional of an experience that is. There was certainly a sense of loss there. I think really one of the only things that helped it was after moving out from the place that wasn't very good for my mental health and moving into another that was also really horrible for my mental health, finally moving to the space that I'm in now and learning more about living on my own and taking the time to settle in and deal with other stressors in my life, I had to sort of let time do its thing, and that, in a sense, did help. I think just being able to express myself, to talk about my concerns about housing and some of the barriers that I faced while searching and, just the anxiety about, rent or whatever it was. It may not even be a rational anxiety or negative thought. There's so much that can come up when you're in a situation that deals with your sense of home. Certainly, on the topic of mental health, doing things like, keeping up with general health, using tools like mindfulness, meditation. I would say making sure you're getting a nutritious diet, like including vitamins and supplements that can help your overall health and mood, and exercising and sleeping properly, which of course, when you're dealing with a housing situation, sleep is one of those things that's probably first to go. There's all of those things, and certainly for me, keeping up with my therapy appointments, all of that is very, very helpful. Sometimes, however, it's not like it's going to necessarily solve anything overnight. In times like that, it does help to know that there's a plan in place, that there is support there. And it's a time like that where, For me, I would lean into my support system, have to challenge my own thinking that, oh, maybe I'm bothering somebody, or, this, that, and the other stuff, where, that's what your support system is there for. And that's what resources such as, crisis lines, distress lines, uh, going to therapy to talk to your therapist, those are those things that that's what they're there for. And in some cases, in really severe crisis, obviously, uh, medication can help. That aside, I just wanted to get across that, certainly dealing with a housing situation is a form of loss and trauma too. I know I'm not alone there. In a very different way, I do know that that is a common experience. It's not often talked about, but there are a lot of families that can move from home to home, city to city, or perhaps migrants moving to other countries, uh, feeling threatened that they're not going to be able to, get through the immigration system, given a hard time about that, can threaten somebody's sense of home, and that, well, I'm not really welcome here. I have heard it said that those are feelings that can come up, the feeling of loss and anxiety, depression, and all of that. Like, we take it for granted, the idea of shelter and what that means. I mean, there's also, I try to think of it in perspective. It's like I didn't, lose my house to a natural disaster or something like that. But those are things that, yeah, people do go through, and having that experience of losing a house, uh, losing an apartment, or what have you, or having a really difficult time getting to that place, can be very distressing. Well, now I'd like to segue into another area of loss and grief that I've had experience with, which is the loss of friendships. And at a time, the past few years during a pandemic, I guess I was naive. I thought that because the world was going through such turmoil and chaos and suffering, that we might have an increase in a sense of the warm and fuzzies, of compassionate responses. But that's not what happened. What happened was people became much more cold and prickly, I guess you could say, just more mean, and emotions were running high. And I had an experience of a loss of friends in different ways. Like I said with the roommate situation that I had before, well, yeah, that in ways that was definitely loss of friendship as I moved on uh, with my life to live on my own. I had loss of friendship in terms of people that were involved with my college program that I took and the industry that I was just starting to get interested in. But those friendships, as soon as the pandemic hit, all of those uh, friendships fell through, and others on social media that, if I shared one story that they didn't like, that they thought it was too negative of me, or something they thought was too intense, whatever I was going through or whatever, well, that was unfriend, block, delete, ignore, gone. Just like that. They would just cut me off, and I would deal with the sound of silence. In a way, I guess the pandemic showed me who my friends are. And I have to say again, it's one of these things that it's very difficult when you're dealing with ex-friends. Again, it's not something that, certainly you're not going to get bereavement leave, or you're not going to get time off of work because you've lost a friendship. But that those ones can cut pretty deep, especially if you've been, if you've been close friends and you've shared a lot of your life with the person, and then they just cut deep into you and cut you off like you're anybody, and like all your years of friendship meant nothing. Yes, it's very hurtful and is an experience of loss and grief, and you go through again the sadness, the anger, the fear of, oh, I'm never going to make that connection again or whatever, and it's just something that you go through. And certainly in this digital age, as I'm alluding to as well, in terms of losing friendships, it's so tied in with social media, and there is certainly a lot of grief. Humans weren't necessarily wired for social media the way it is, having 1,000 friends, which of course the human brain can't process thousands of people or hundreds of people, and when you do have those experiences of rejection while you're scrolling and tapping and going through the emotional roller coaster of social media, yes, your brain can interpret it as pain, as literal pain. And, that's why there's so many folks that decide to either limit their usage of social media or quit. Yeah, it can be very painful when you lose a friend over something that could be very trivial, like, you post something that, they read the wrong way. They don't bother to clarify with you privately. They don't bother to follow up or anything like that. Just block, get rid of you. Don't want you no more. It really does make you question what a friend means in this day and age. And I cannot tell you exactly how I've coped with it or gotten into a better space with it. I think there's probably still some more work I can do on this note myself. I do think I've gotten to a better place of, forget you, and that's the simplest way to put it, I mean, forget you if, you're going to treat me like that and really not give some kind of dignity or respect and base life off of an augmented or altered reality such as social media. I mean, honestly, it's amazing to think that you could, through something like that, you could throw away years of a nice friendship. I think as well, what's helped me in terms of grieving the loss of friends, and as it ties in with social media, I think I've had to begin to recognize all of the mental gymnastics that it is, telling myself, I'm not on trial. I'm not at boot camp here. I'm dealing with things like gaslighting and manipulation or being taken advantage of, psychological abuse, that you can define what I'm saying as that, forms of mental abuse because of the way I'm talking. It's like, it's put me in this spot where, it has made my brain just go on and on like this with these unanswered questions and doubts about myself, uncertainties about myself. And I have to stand back a minute and think, well, you know what? That's not necessarily me putting that on me. I'm absorbing this from my environment, an environment that tells me I'm not good enough because I'm not perfect, because I didn't make a social media account that looks the same as everybody else exactly, because I tried to reach out to somebody and from their perspective, they thought that I was being too much. Don't know what to do for him, don't know what to say to him, so the easiest thing is to block him, is to delete him. I know what I'm saying here sounds like it's not a big deal, but when you've been through an experience like this, it's really hard to say until you've really experienced something like it. It's really easy, I know it's very easy to just dismiss it. But if you haven't been through it in a repeated way, of just, rejection, block, unfollow, delete, consecutively over a period of time, it's hard for me to tell you exactly what that does to the human brain. I think it did very awful things to my brain. I'll say that much. It was an awful experience. I was able to, recover from it and show resiliency and persevere in my life, that kind of thing. At the time, though, it was experienced as pain, the loss of friendship. And of course, in this day and age, it's not the way it was decades ago. It's losing basically an account, but that's losing or a contact that you have. And when you're off social media, apparently, nobody has anybody's number. Nobody knows anybody else's email. So when you lose somebody on Instagram, Facebook, it's like they're gone forever, never to be seen again. I don't know, maybe if you live in the same city, you might bump into them, but it can be a very hurtful experience, though. I am talking for a long time here, but I do want to get to a lot of stuff just because, I don't really want to do videos like every week or every month exactly. I don't. So when I come up with a topic, I want to hit it thoroughly because, I don't necessarily like to do talking videos so much. But when I get the inspiration, I definitely want to make sure I'm really look in depth at the points I'm making and hoping that the audience can have an understanding of the material. The next thing I'm going to move on to, and I'm going to lump them together just for the sake of time, is a sense of loss in terms of education and career. So this is, again, another form of grief, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that, again, I'm trying to do to help myself overcome it or live with the reality that, this was kind of a stain that happened in my life, and I have to live with the consequences of it. Maybe it's for the better, maybe it'll turn out for the better, but I don't know. All I know is that when I did experience the loss of education, which I've talked about that in videos before, the experiences I had very early on in my life, the total loss of direction and just feeling kind of blindsided by school's decision to do what they did and treat me the way that they did when I was in the education system. Those years were very awful for me coming out of all of that, and just it was another experience of rejection. And absolutely you can feel grief when your ideas for your life, your hopes, your dreams don't really work out, and you sort of feel back at square one because maybe you don't have a lot of other interests. Maybe your heart's desire was, like in my case, it was acting, and it just didn't really work out. By the time that I tried to go for my other heart's desire, that didn't really work out either. So I can only say, from my experience in education, it can definitely, there's a grieving component to it. And it's another taboo in society. I'm absolutely aware what I'm saying is taboo. But yes, when you haven't really been treated well in the education system, it hurts. Another area that just cuts like a knife. The feeling of shame and humiliation, and certainly in jobs too. This is something that has come up in my mind recently as well, is jobs that become places for a lot of shame, humiliation, and just being expected to tolerate actual abuse and harassment and torture and, things that just, it's not healthy. And I've had to say to myself, it's okay that I don't want to have to go through re-traumatization. it's okay that I don't want to walk into an area that makes me feel really horrible. Why is me being abused, feeling psychologically abused, a badge of honor? It isn't. Does it mean I'm stronger because I can tolerate just going through a lot of horrible things? Because I wouldn't put my friend through that. You see, if you're a friend of mine, I wouldn't tell you, oh, go, you're being weak and stupid and loser and lazy, and you need to cope with that environment. And if you don't, then something bad's going to happen. Like, what does that mean? So I've had to really look at the kind of cultural conditioning that I've been handed. It's been passed down through generations. Take an honest look at it, and that's where I understand my sources of such intense feelings of loss and grief with my experiences in the education system, which eventually, and job, and workplaces, which of course eventually I did graduate a college program after 3 years. I did get a diploma, and I have had jobs in my life, even though there are folks that make me feel like I've never worked a day in my life, even though I started working when I was 11 years old. That aside, I think that as well during the pandemic, I knew that my line of work that I wanted to get into was not panning out as I wanted. And I did a lot of introspection, a lot of reflection, and really asking myself if that's what I want to do. If it was just an extension, well, I studied media communications and TV broadcasting, and started to get some jobs as a production assistant and doing video editing at home and occasional writing jobs as well. But really asking myself, is this just an extension of the acting career that didn't work? And that I've really spent so many years of that feeling of loss, and how that connects back to my childhood, and basically just feeling any hope or dream I've had in my life is completely crushed by society and the system. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody out there, but there was just so much inner work I needed to do to start processing the layers of grief that really definitely had a lot to do with the stressors I dealt with. This is all ongoing grief in my life, of loss of friendships and romantic life, and that not really working, and the whole bit, right? So, these are layers upon layers of grief. And I have to say that when it comes to education and the workplace, the idea of professionalization, corporatization, industrialization as we know it, when you've lost a job, or certainly lost a sense of like direction in your life, or really just feeling like you're no good, or you'll never get to something that you want to do, or you feel like you just don't want to do anything because you're not appreciated, or nobody cares, or you're pressured into doing something, whatever it is, it's very, very difficult, and it is a hardship. And it is one of these things that I think a lot of times when we're discussing mental health as a collective in a general sense, it's an area of grief that's, I think, one of the least understood. If you've just lost that sense of either security, and to feel like you're just rejected or kind of pushed out of it, it's a form of trauma, definitely stress. At least I think most people can agree that's a very stressful experience. And it's a sense of grief. And once again, I think I've had to really come back to self-care. first and foremost. That's the last thing is, when you're going through something like this, a lot of folks might want to jump into negative coping skills. And I've done that before too, but it's actually a really good time to focus on self-care so you can figure out the next steps. What is my current safety plan or my ideas of the next steps I might be able to take and all of that. And it's not going to be linear because, again, if you're grieving a career or a dream of yours, or you're dealing with these intense emotions of shame or humiliation that you just couldn't cope with the pressures, these are things that it really, through time, through therapy, for me, it was an extraordinary amount of therapy to help me through that. And again, the loss of some kind of idea of friendship with colleagues I might have had or acquaintances through that whole thing. These are things that I had to really sit down and with my therapist, I felt like I was crazy. Like, am I insane here? Because these were folks that were saying we're close and we're friends in this, and then they kind of leave me hung out to dry and ignoring me and saying things behind my back that aren't nice and this kind of stuff. Like it's a type of psychological distress. I would say to anybody watching this now that, yeah, of course you can grieve a job. Of course you can grieve a loss of direction in your educational journey, whether that's, you have to withdraw from something or maybe you failed it or what have you. There's so many different ways that in this area of life, a lot of folks just disregard it, right? They could listen to what I'm saying and think, whoa, well, big deal. Well, actually, yeah, you know what? Big deal. Yeah, because, the education and jobs is tied up with what? Money, it's a major trigger for a lot of people. Obviously, money, the way people talk about money, it can be a very upsetting topic for a lot of folks. And I definitely, to my ears, when I hear somebody saying they've, lost a job or they just really feel directionless and lost in life, well, my heart goes out to that person. I'm not going to then say, they're dumb and they're weak and they're lazy and this other stuff. Well, maybe they need some encouragement, or maybe they could just use a compassionate ear. Maybe just a sense that somebody cares about them, that somebody can see them and can hear them, potentially understand them, but just that they're in the vicinity of an understanding heart. It really goes a long way when a person is going through that. And I can attest to that. I know that would have been helpful for me. And that's not the way I was treated when I was going through my issues with the education system and when I went through issues in the workplace. Do you know, my character was attacked. My personality was attacked when I was going through stuff. Oh, he's just making excuses, just coming up with stuff. He's not being strong enough. He's not being man enough. Well, he just needs to try harder. He's not trying enough. Yeah, part of my grief was not only, the grief of all the stuff I'm dealing with, but it's also the grief that I had people near me that were responding in a manner that was really making the situation worse. And it took a long time, actually, that, I'm talking family members, immediate family members. It took a long time for them to start to see, wait a minute, he's not responding to me when I'm giving my ideas of tough love. He's not responding to it right now. And it took a while for actually my support system, in some sense, it took a while for my support system through the job stuff and the education stuff. it took my support system a while to realize, oh, we need to be there for him during this time and not judging and blaming him. It's a real foreign concept. I know that it is. Most people listening to this now think, oh, he's being entitled and narcissistic, and he's asking for a lot, and he's just looking for excuses for his behavior. He just wants to be enabled, this and that. You are entitled to your opinion. All I know is that at that time, I definitely could have used people who could understand what I was going through and just could offer their ear and some support for me, because I never felt it was like I didn't know what I was doing or what to do. It's just that it was extremely difficult and eventually took its toll on my health, which is another thing that is an area of grief. I know this is extremely long, probably, this video. Feels like it's going on forever, but that's just me. A feeling of a loss of health, especially when it comes to mental health. When I know for myself, when my brain starts to get into this distorted thinking and to a place where I'm actually extremely exhausted, that I can't get out of bed no matter how hard I try, and when I stand up, I'm really dizzy and lightheaded, and I'm slurring my words, and this kind of thing, that's scary for me. And it is experienced as a loss, and like, I can't control that. And sometimes, you know what? There are times in life where things just suck. And those things that suck have to run their course. And that's an answer nobody wants to hear. People want a fix, right? You want it to be fixed, and here's the solution and the recommendation and the prescription, and all of that has been met, and you can just, within days, you can just be up on your feet and no complaining, pull your pants up and go. Well, illness doesn't work that way, and life doesn't really work that way. So I know that, yes, when I've started to notice myself getting ill, there are times I can catch it and, use the tools that I have, and it can, I can overcome it. There are times, however, that the issue itself is too big. The issues in my life have snowballed. It all becomes too much, too heavy, and I'm just going through it. Sometimes that happens to us humans. And I just feel that it's so important for me to say that. Yeah, we go through stuff, and basically my only point here, really, I suppose, is to look at it through a more empathetic lens. And just because I'm talking about things that deal with coming from a more heart-centered space, or somewhere between the rational mind and the emotional mind, hopefully in the wise mind, I'm just trying to say there certainly are different ways that people in just in general discourse can talk about grief and look at grief in a different way, and that it's, it doesn't have to be like this nasty word or just limited to one thing. And that, when somebody is saying, like, I'm grieving, I don't really think there's people that, maybe there is, I don't know why anybody would just kind of say it like it's just something to say, think it's, it's just to get people to feel sorry for me, or I'm getting an attention this way, and that, whatever that is a sickness in of itself. For the people that I know who've talked openly about grief, that's not what they're doing. It just bothers me when other folks try to dismiss it. It just through the words sometimes doesn't really get to the actual lived experience of it. And that's paradoxical about language and communication is that communication is supposed to be the way that, we can help each other to understand and convey our uh, experiences, our emotions, express ourselves, and all of this. But as well, sometimes language can prevent communication, and sometimes these experiences aren't always clear, and it can kind of get lost in. It just can kind of get muddy. And my point is that I know for myself, I was going through all of this. I was constantly questioning myself, was it really that bad? Was my experience of loss, was I being dramatic? Was I exaggerating? And you know what? I think losing a life, anybody's life, well, why? I don't think that it's necessary for life to be any worse than that. You know what I mean? Like the fact that I was, grieving my friend, and the housing and jobs and education not really going where I wanted it, my creative life, and all of these things, all of these different things within the span of about a year. I have to show myself compassion, because other people aren't going to do it for me. They're not going to give me compassion about it. And in fact, like I'm saying, a lot of folks really dismiss it and dismiss a lot of the struggles I had with that, and wanting to pass it off like I was fabricating and or delusional or something. And it's like, in all my years of going to therapy, I've said it many times, me lying or delusions or manipulating or any kind of violence or anything like that isn't part of my history, isn't part of my story. So, this kind of notion that, it's like it's in his head, or it's just, it's not such a big deal. He's just making it into a big deal. Well, actually, I think some of it was actually very difficult, and anybody would have felt a certain way about that, and might have taken about the same amount of time I took to start feeling a bit better, and like I could get on with my life. There are probably some folks as well that could have taken even longer than I am. Could have taken, this whole thing with me, starting about end of 2020 up till now, a complete, my entire life falling away from me was basically the feeling, but just a lot of simultaneous feelings of grief and a series of unfortunate events, and then going through the whole recovery of it. There are people that they could have been still going well into 2024 or 2025, just to have clarity and awareness about their feelings and what was happening. So I'm not going to sit here and feel like I'm, sorry for myself, or disregard the work that I've done for myself. I am proud of myself, and I give myself credit for the work that I've done to get my life back in the face of just so much loss, and how that created this intense fear within me that this might happen again. Of course, there is that fear that, well, maybe someday I'll have to go through multiple losses again. I don't want to. Life might present it to me again. I really hope not. And I'll do the best I can to make sure that, that doesn't happen. But, like many folks, you don't think of it happening to you. Everyone's focused on survival, and they don't want to think for a second. Most people don't want to think. One day, you could lose just about everything. It is within the realm of possibility. And I don't say that to scare anybody. It can happen. And for me, I really do appreciate, and I hold a very, very special place in my heart for the people that really were supportive of me during all of it. This was all happening at a time when I was feeling, pretty good about myself, and I was talking openly about the kind of, tools and resources and supports, and kind of, I'm very knowledgeable and resourceful on mental health. So how could it be that this person that seemed a lot more level-headed, probably more level-headed than I am now, seems so level-headed, and all of this, could then go through this horrendous experience? I don't know why, but it did happen. And again, I'm just so appreciative of the folks that really supported me, and the ones that, it's not like I had to have to talk about this every day or all the time with everybody. I also very much appreciate the friends of mine that were just like, I want to, invite him out or include him, the same as anybody else, and treat him the same. Those experiences for me were incredibly helpful, as were the ones where I could talk to friends openly about what I was going through. It was all very helpful, and again, I'm so grateful for that. And it was so key in terms of where I am today. I know I could not be where I am today if I didn't have my mother, my brothers say, I care about you, and I just want you to know that I'm here and I love you. Or, the very rare occasion that there would be other friends of mine, people that I've known throughout my life, that could reach me and just wish me well. It really goes a long way. In my closing of this whole thing, which, again, there really isn't any end to grief. Grief never ends. Those things, all of these areas I mentioned, and likely in the future, it's going to be part of me, part of my being, my lived reality and experience. I'm not somebody that, I don't believe in a total erasure of the past. I know there's people that are really into positive thinking and the overdose motivation and the hustle culture and all of that, erasing the past. Well, I'm not somebody that agrees with that. That's part of you, part of your story, your life. And, sometimes it is for better or worse. And I understand you can't go back in time and all of that, but sometimes you can gain incredible insights from your past. Not to the point of like rumination or obsession about the past, but, and there's also a lot of warm memories that are there in the past. Of course, not physically. It's not physically here in the now, obviously. I'm not in the past right now. But what I do hang on to is the memory. And, those memories I'm going to cherish. And I really just hope, out of all of this, I hope I've given something in this video that, there are certainly those practical coping skills to use. And I hope for anybody on your processing of grief, it's really just giving yourself, allowing yourself the time. And if you're somebody supporting somebody going through grief, I really hope that, there is of course, you want to balance, you want to have healthy boundaries. Of course, you want to have healthy boundaries. And, sometimes you may not always be emotionally available. If you do have that time to be with somebody, that there is a sense of that empathy and understanding for somebody, because something that, it may not be, somebody, you lose a friend, maybe it's not a loss for you. Maybe you don't experience it as a trauma, exactly. Or maybe you've lost a job, but you don't feel anything from it. Well, that's your experience. To somebody else who's grieving a job, or, all their hard work in school, and they're having a crisis where they feel, well, all of it was useless, and now I'm having extreme existential crisis over it. Well, that's their experience. So, I guess in a sense, this video as well, it's an appeal to people who, if you're supporting somebody going through a difficult time, I just hope that you'd consider ways of expanding your heart. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to laugh at somebody else's grief, laugh at somebody else's trauma, but I know you wouldn't like it if somebody did it to you. If it happened to you and somebody laughed at your grief, something that you felt was taken from you, or something that just, it's not in your control, and how hurtful that can be. It's something to think about. I'm not telling you you have to, the do's and don'ts, and if you don't do this, that means this, that. I'm just putting it out there that I know for me, some of what's really made the difference is at least having, even though it did feel very minimal in some ways, like I say, I dealt with a lot of actually what you might say is bullying, adult bullying, which does happen, and types of social trauma, or just people that didn't know what to do, or they were trying, but they stumbled over their words and said all the wrong things to me, and then just dug in, and now I'm here thinking that was pretty awful, and they know it was pretty awful, but they just really didn't know what to do. I'm aware of a lot of the different kind of variables and factors at play in that, but I hope this has made sense, and one, that somebody looking at me right now knows they're not alone. Even if you're somebody that's a supporter, and you don't really like to be in the limelight, you kind of like to you kind of like to be there to be a cheerleader or support a friend or a family member of yours. It's just to hopefully give you a sense of other ways you can be there to really, actively listen and show an empathetic response, and all of that. And obviously none of what I'm saying is easy. Certainly there's no perfection in any of this. The thing about grief is it is non-linear, and you just do hope that the pieces all fall together eventually. Okay? So I hope that's helped, and if you're watching this, I wish you well. If you do like this video, typically I'm much more better received when I'm doing music, original music, and character acting, and rarely do I really want to get on here and talk. But if you have enjoyed this talk, I would say, just to, if you could please leave a, like, and leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. I would very much appreciate it. So that's it for now. Thank you. Take care. Bye for now.